Hey everybody, it's May 1st, 2026, and we are covering about how Ukraine just rewritten every rule of modern warfare in a single month, and why Putin's most expensive strategic bet just collapsed overnight. Let me start with something I want you to really sit with for a second. Imagine you are Vladimir Putin, sitting in the Kremlin sometime in early 2024. You have a plan. It is working. You're flooding Ukrainian skies with hundreds of Shahed kamikaze drones every single night. Cheap, Iranian-designed, Russian-manufactured machines that cost somewhere between $20,000 and $50,000 each. And Ukraine? Ukraine is shooting them down with Patriot missiles and NASAMS interceptors that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars per shot. You are winning an economic war without firing a single tank shell. You are bleeding. Ukraine dry, one drone at a time. The math was simple, brutal, and seemingly unbeatable. And then, in April 2026, Ukraine did something that no military in the history of the world has ever done. And I mean that literally, not as a YouTube exaggeration, not as a dramatic hook. Literally, no country in the world had done what Ukraine just did. In fact, Ukraine did not just do one unprecedented thing this month. It did 4 of them. And together, they have turned Putin's entire strategic playbook into a pile of very expensive scrap metal. I have been going through the ISW reports, Breaking Defense, Kiev Independent, Euromaidan Press, Air and Space Forces magazine, and a stack of defense analysis pieces over the past few days, and I want to walk you through exactly what happened, what it means, and why the people at NATO headquarters are watching this war differently now than they were 3 months ago. Because this is not just a story about Ukraine. This is a story about what warfare looks like from this point forward, for every country on Earth. So let's start at the beginning. Let's start with the problem Ukraine was drowning in. Russia has dramatically increased its use of Iranian Shahed drones, alongside domestically manufactured systems to strike Ukrainian cities, energy infrastructure, and civilian targets. The scale of this campaign is staggering when you actually look at the numbers. According to the Ukrainian Air Force, Russian forces have launched more than 22,400 Shahed and Gerber-type drones against Ukraine since the start of the full-scale invasion. And those launches were not slowing down. They were accelerating. Russia found an incredibly effective rhythm. Mass overnight drone barrages launched from multiple directions, overwhelming air defense systems through sheer volume. On the night of April 18th into April 19th alone, Russian forces launched 236 drones at Ukraine overnight. Shahed-type, Gerber-type, Italmus-type, and others, fired from Bryansk, Kursk, Oryol, Smolensk, Rostov, Krasnodar, occupied Donetsk, and Crimea. 236 drones in one night, from 7 directions, simultaneously. Now think about what it costs to stop that if every intercept requires a $300,000 or $400,000 missile. The economics are catastrophic. For every cheap drone Russia fires, Ukraine potentially burns through the equivalent of a luxury sports car and interceptor. Costs. Putin understood this perfectly. It was not just a military strategy, it was financial warfare. But Ukraine had been working on something. Quietly, inside a government-backed innovation platform called Brave One, defense tech companies were racing to solve this problem. And by March 2026, the numbers were already telling a different story. Ukrainian interceptor drones destroyed a record number of Russian UAVs of various types in March 2026, over 33,000. Let that land for a moment. 33,000 drones intercepted in a single month. Not by Patriot missiles, not by NASAMS, by cheap drone hunting drones. In the first 4 months of 2026, the Ukrainian Defense Forces received twice as many interceptor drones as they did throughout the entire year of 2025. The production ramp was vertical. The capability was growing faster than Russia could understand what was happening to it. And then on April 23, 2026, Ukrainian Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov stood up and announced what his ministry had built. And the defense world stopped cold. Ukraine has become the first country to scale the use of remotely operated interceptor drones capable of long-distance strikes. A year ago, through Brave One, we initiated the development and testing of remote control technology for interceptor drones. Today, we have a confirmed result. Shooting down targets at distances of hundreds and thousands of kilometers, Fedorov wrote on social media. Read that sentence again. Hundreds and thousands of kilometers. Not from the front line, not from a trailer 10 kilometers behind the trenches, from Kiev, from Lviv, from another country, entirely. Now here is what makes this so genuinely revolutionary, because I want to explain this properly, because I think a lot of coverage misses the deeper significance. Before this system existed, an interceptor drone operator had to be close to the front, typically stationed anywhere from 10 to 50 kilometers behind the line of contact, physically near enough to maintain a radio signal with their drone. That created two massive problems that Russia was actively exploiting. First, the operator was a target. Russian artillery, Russian FPV drones, Russian surveillance systems, they were all hunting for these operator positions. Find the operator, destroy the operator, neutralize the interceptor capability. Second, Russia's electronic warfare systems, Krasuka, Borsoglebsk, Zhytel, and others, were designed to jam exactly this kind of radio-based drone control signal. These are expensive, purpose-built systems that Russia has deployed extensively along the front, and they were working. Traditional drone control signals operate on radio frequencies that Russian jamming systems eat for breakfast. Ukraine's new remote control technology eliminates both of these vulnerabilities simultaneously. The technology allows drone operators to control interceptor drones from protected environments in cities such as Kyiv and Lviv, or even from abroad, instead of operating near the front. Remote control increases the effectiveness of interception, minimizes risks for operators, and allows capabilities to be scaled without being tied to the front, Fedorov wrote. The connection between the drone and operator is established through secure data links, not traditional radio frequencies. Russia's entire electronic warfare infrastructure, built and deployed at enormous cost to jam frontline drone signals, is now largely irrelevant against this system. The operators are physically safe. The signal cannot be jammed in the traditional way. And because the operators no longer need to be near the front, many more of them can be deployed simultaneously from secure locations anywhere on Earth. More than 10 defense manufacturers have already integrated their remote control capability into their interceptor drone systems. This is not one company with one prototype. This is an industrial ecosystem. Ukraine's defense ministry noted that in 2022, the country had fewer than 10 now specialized defense companies. 4 years later, the numbers had increased to about 5,100 such companies, with roughly one-third exclusively dedicated to drones. That is not a defense industry. That is a defense revolution. And it is producing results that no military planner on either side of this conflict fully anticipated. The cost equation that Putin built his entire drone strategy around has been flipped completely upside down. Cheap drones are now being hunted by cheap drones. The economic advantage that made the Shahed campaign so strategically attractive for Moscow has evaporated, and the truly frightening part for the Kremlin, the part that keeps Russian military planners awake at night, is that Ukraine is just getting started. Fedorov stated that Ukraine is moving toward its goals of 100% detection and no less than 95% neutralization of enemy air targets. 100% detection, 95% neutralization. Those are not goals being set by a country that is losing. Those are goals being set by a country that believes it has already won the technological race in the air. And I want you to hold on to that thought, because in the next section, I'm going to tell you about the single most jaw-dropping military 1st of April 2026. One that happened not in the skies over Ukraine, not on the front lines, but on the open waters of the Black Sea. A story that made every naval strategist on Earth reconsider what sea power actually means in the 21st century. Now, before I get into what happened in the Black Sea on April 19th, 2026, I need you to understand the context, because without the context, the event sounds impressive. With the context, it sounds like something out of a science fiction novel that somehow became real. Ukraine does not have a traditional navy. Let me be blunt about that. Russia made sure of it. In the early days of the full-scale invasion in February 2022, Russia seized or destroyed the majority of Ukraine's surface fleet. The flagship of the Ukrainian Navy, the frigate Hetman Sahaydachny, was scuttled by its own crew to prevent capture. Ukraine's naval infrastructure in Sevastopol had been under Russian occupation since 2014. On paper, Ukraine had no sea power. On paper, Ukraine had surrendered the Black Sea to Russia on day one of the war. And Russia treated it that way, using the Black Sea as a launch corridor to fire cruise missiles and Shahed drones at Ukrainian cities from angles that land-based air defense systems struggle to cover. Russia had a Black Sea fleet. Ukraine had nothing. Except Ukrainian engineers do not accept nothing as a final answer. What Ukraine did, instead of rebuilding a traditional navy, is one of the most creative acts of military improvisation in modern history. It built a fleet of unmanned surface vessels. Robotic boats with no crew, no captain, no sailors to kill. The Magura series, the Sea Baby. Cheap, fast, expendable, and increasingly lethal. And over the past 2 years, these little boats have done things that would have seemed impossible. Ukraine's Magura series naval drones have shot down Russian Su-30 fighter jets using air-to-air missiles. In March, a Ukrainian naval drone carrier destroyed a Russian Ka-27 helicopter using an FPV drone. a crewless boat shooting down a fighter jet. Let that image sit with you. No pilot, no crew. A robot boat launched a missile and destroyed a $30 million aircraft. The Black Sea, which Russia considered its private pond, had become one of the most dangerous bodies of water on Earth for Russian military assets. And Ukraine had done it without a single warship. But on April 19, 2026, Ukraine took this to an entirely new level. And I want to walk through exactly what happened, because the details matter. According to Ukraine's Unmanned Systems Forces on April 19th, operators from the Unmanned Surface Vessel Division of the 412th Nemesis Brigade successfully engaged and destroyed a Russian loitering munition in a maritime operational zone. The Unmanned Systems Forces described the operation as the first instance in modern warfare of an aerial threat being intercepted by a drone launched from a sea-based unmanned platform. Read that carefully. This was not a ship launching a missile at a drone. This was a robotic boat. A boat with no human beings on it, opening a compartment, launching a smaller drone from its deck, and that interceptor drone climbing into the sky, tracking a Russian Shahed, and destroying it in flight. Think about what this means technically for a second. You have a surface vessel operating on open water, constantly moving, constantly adjusting to waves and currents. From that moving platform, a drone launches, stabilizes, acquires an airborne target traveling at speed, and intercepts it. The integration of navigation systems, targeting systems, launch mechanisms, and interceptor drone guidance that has to work simultaneously for this to succeed is genuinely extraordinary. And Ukraine did not just test this in a controlled environment. They did it in an active combat zone against a live incoming weapon on April 19, 2026. USF Commander Major Robert Magyar Bravdy reported that Ukraine has already formed one naval drone battalion for such missions inside an existing brigade and is building a second. This is already being organized at unit level. This is not a one-off demonstration. This is doctrine being written in real time. According to Samuel Bendit, an advisor on Russian military technology at the Center for Naval Analyses think tank, this capability adds another protection layer for Ukrainians against incoming Russian long-range drones. When integrated with the rest of the defensive systems, it makes Shaheds even more vulnerable. Bendit added that based on available open-source data, Russia has yet to achieve anything similar. That sentence from a credible American defense analyst is one of the most significant things said about this conflict in months. We are not talking about a gap that might close next quarter. Russia does not have unmanned surface vessels with interceptor drone launch capability. Russia does not have the industrial ecosystem to build this quickly, and Ukraine already has it in active combat use. Now let's talk about why the Black Sea geography makes this so strategically significant. Because I went deep on this, and the implications are profound. The cities of southern Ukraine, Odessa, Mykolaiv, Kherson, have always been uniquely exposed to Russian drone attacks because those attacks approach from the sea, from directions where land-based air defense systems have coverage gaps. Ground-based radar and missile systems are optimized for land approaches. When a Shahed comes skimming in low over open water from the southwest, it exploits those gaps. Russia knew this. That is why so many of its massed drone barrages include waves launched from the Crimea and Black Sea directions. It makes comprehensive interception dramatically harder. Using surface drone carriers to deploy interceptor drones expands air defense options and creates an additional layer of protection for Ukrainian cities. Many such Russian attacks are directed at cities in southeastern Ukraine and launched over the Black Sea, serving a twofold purpose: wearing down civilians in the region and forcing Ukraine to make land concessions in peace negotiations, exploiting the fact that Ukraine lacks traditional naval power. But here's the thing. Ukraine just closed that gap. A fleet of robotic boats, each capable of launching interceptor drones, distributed across the Black Sea approaches to southern Ukraine, creates a mobile air defense perimeter that no one in military history has ever attempted before. It is not fixed. It cannot be targeted by a single precision strike. It moves with the threat. It adapts. And it costs a fraction of what traditional naval air defense systems cost. The SBS described the achievement as a new level of integration of maritime and aerial drone capabilities, adding that deploying surface vessels as interceptor launch platforms creates an additional echelon of protection for Ukrainian cities. Additional echelon. That is the key phrase. Ukraine is not replacing its existing air defense layers. It is adding new ones. Every layer added means more Shaheds intercepted before they reach a Ukrainian city, a Ukrainian power plant, a Ukrainian hospital. And here's something I found in my research that I think most Western coverage has completely missed. Counter-drone interception is among the areas of expertise Ukraine has offered to Middle East countries whose critical infrastructure faces similar obstacles, particularly in the Strait of Hormuz. Ukraine is already exporting this knowledge. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Gulf states that face their own drone threat environments. They are watching the Black Sea operation and sending people to learn from it. Gulf states are already rushing to buy Ukrainian drone expertise, with 10-year defense cooperation agreements signed with Saudi Arabia and Qatar in March 2026. Ukraine has turned its battlefield laboratory into an export product. The country that lost its navy in 2022 is now the world's leading authority on unmanned naval warfare. Let that irony fully land. But I want to take a step back for a moment and ask you a question. When you combine what we just talked about in Section 1, interceptor drones controlled from thousands of kilometers away, eliminating the risk to operators and defeating Russian electronic warfare, with what we just covered here, a robotic boat launching aerial interceptors over open water, what are you looking at? You're looking at a country that has built a multi-domain, multi-layer air defense system that operates simultaneously from land and sea, controlled from anywhere on Earth, at a cost that Russia simply cannot compete with. Ukraine has operationalized something that the world's largest defense contractors have been theorizing about for decades. And the extraordinary thing? This is not even the most shocking development from April 2026, because while all of this was happening in the air and on the sea, something happened on the ground that made Zelensky call it the first time in the history of warfare. Robots, on their own, with no infantry support, walked into a Russian position, and the Russian soldiers surrendered to machines. Let me paint you a picture. It is somewhere along the front line in eastern Ukraine. The exact location has not been disclosed by Ukrainian authorities, and I will explain why that operational security decision itself tells you something important. But here is what we know happened. FPV drones scream in first. That distinctive high-pitched whine that Ukrainian and Russian soldiers alike have learned to dread more than almost any other sound on the modern battlefield. They crater the dugouts. They scatter the defenders. They make the position untenable for any human being to stand upright in. Then, as the ground stops shaking, something rolls forward. Not soldiers, not infantry with rifles and body armor. Robots, armed ground vehicles with thermal cameras scanning, turrets rotating, machine guns ready. Russian soldiers burrowed into their positions, look up, and they see machines coming for them, and they do the only rational thing left to do. They put their hands up and surrender to the robots. On April 13th, 2026, Ukraine's Arms Makers Day, President Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed what defense analysts had been tracking for months. Ukrainian forces successfully captured a Russian-held position using only unmanned platforms, ground robots and drones, without a single soldier's boot physically on the assault. For the first time in the history of this war, Ukrainian warriors captured an enemy position using exclusively unmanned platforms, he said during his speech to weapons manufacturers. And then he said something that I think is going to be quoted in military history textbooks for decades. The future is here on the battlefield, and Ukraine is creating it. Now, I want to be fair here, because I went deep into the research on this, and there are some important nuances that a lot of coverage glossed over. Ukrainian military analyst Ivan Stupak told the Moscow Times that this was likely not a massive breakthrough of a heavily fortified position, probably the seizure of a smaller secondary fortification. And the RAND Corporation published analysis noting that ground robots face serious obstacles, literally and figuratively, when it comes to replacing infantry in complex terrain assault. Most ground robots continue to rely on wheels or tracks, which have sharp limits on the types of terrain they can traverse, and not all enemy strongpoints are built at the end of paved driveways. Even accounting for combat loads, human infantry can climb, jump, wade, and otherwise traverse a large variety of obstacles in ways that robots still cannot match. That is honest, credible analysis, and I think it is worth acknowledging. But here is what the skeptics are missing. The significance of April 13th is not that robots replaced infantry forever in one afternoon. The significance is the proof of concept at operational scale and the trajectory it represents, because this did not come from nowhere. Look at what preceded it. Around January 2026, a DevDroid TW-7.62 unmanned ground vehicle captured 3 Russian soldiers in the Lyman area. By March, a larger cousin, the droid TW-12.7, held frontline positions for 45 consecutive days. 45 consecutive days holding a frontline position with a robot. No food, no sleep, no rotation needed, no fear, no PTSD. Just a machine, holding ground 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Defense analysts are already calling this the new drone wall doctrine, a system where robotic systems handle attrition and seizure, while human soldiers are reserved for consolidation and holding territory. The humans are being moved progressively further from the most dangerous moments of combat. The machines are absorbing the risk that used to get soldiers killed. And the The scale of this ground robot deployment is something I do not think people outside Ukraine fully appreciate. Ukraine's ground robotic systems had already carried out more than 22,000 missions on the front in just 3 months, saving lives more than 22,000 times when a robot went into the most dangerous areas instead of a soldier. 22,000 missions in 3 months. That is roughly 244 missions every single day. Evacuating wounded, delivering ammunition, laying mines, holding positions, conducting reconnaissance. These are missions that used to put Ukrainian soldiers directly in the path of Russian artillery, Russian FPV drones, and Russian snipers. Now a robot takes that risk instead. Ukrainian robotic systems deployed on these missions include the Ratel, Termite, Ardel, Rice, Zimaiy, Protector, Volia, and others. That is not a list of experimental prototypes. That is a product catalog of systems already in mass production and active frontline use. And the numbers behind them are staggering. One manufacturer, Tencor, delivered more than 2,000 ground robots in 2025, and projects demand of roughly 40,000 units in 2026. The number of military units deploying ground robots grew from 67 in November 2025 to 167. By spring 2026, the adoption curve is vertical. The units deploying these systems more than doubled in roughly 5 months. Every week, new Ukrainian brigades are integrating ground robotics into their operational doctrine. Now here is the part that I think genuinely deserves to be called a strategic revolution. Look at what these robots represent for Ukraine specifically, not just in the abstract military technology sense, but in the very specific context of this war. Ukraine is fighting a country with roughly 3 times its population. Russia can absorb casualties at a rate that Ukraine demographically cannot. This has been one of Putin's core assumptions from the beginning: grind Ukraine down through sheer human attrition. Keep feeding soldiers into the front until Ukraine runs out of people willing to fight. It is a brutal, inhuman calculation, but it has driven Russian strategy for 4 years. For Ukraine, the strategic imperative to rapidly roll out ground robots is enormous. 4 years of war against a numerically larger opponent has imposed huge challenges on its ability to continue recruiting and deploying a large enough force to safeguard its sovereignty. Every mission completed by a robot is a Ukrainian soldier who did not have to take that risk. Every position held by an unmanned ground vehicle is a rotation of human fighters who can rest, recover, and survive to fight another day. Ukraine is not just using robots as a tactical tool, it is using them to neutralize Russia's single greatest strategic advantage: numbers. If machines can absorb the attrition that Russia is counting on inflicting on human beings, the entire foundation of Moscow's war of exhaustion begins to crumble. And there is something else I found that almost nobody is talking about. In July 2025, Ukraine's 3rd Separate Assault Brigade reported that FPV drones and a kamikaze ground robot carrying 3 anti-tank mines struck a bunker entrance. When a second robot approached the damaged position, 2 surviving Russian soldiers held up a cardboard sign reading, "We want to surrender," in Russian. A cardboard sign held up to a robot because there were no humans to surrender to. Think about the psychological dimension of that for a moment. Russian soldiers trained and conditioned to fight human enemies, surrendering to machines. There is something about the presence of a robot, relentless, unafraid, impossible to demoralize, impossible to bribe, impossible to reason with, that breaks something in the human resistance calculation. You cannot appeal to a robot's mercy. You cannot wound it and watch it bleed and feel like you have won something. It just keeps coming. As of early 2026, thousands of ground robots are crawling across the gray zone along the front line in eastern Ukraine. Some killer ground robots fitted with turrets and remotely controlled machine guns have been tested. In mid-February, Ukrainian authorities released a video of a Ukrainian ground robot using its thermal camera to detect a Russian soldier in the dark of night and engage the target with a heavy machine gun. This is what the front line looks like now, not just soldiers with rifles. A hybrid environment where machines and humans operate side by side, where the most dangerous moments are increasingly delegated to systems that feel no pain and require no coffins. And I want you to hold one more thought before I move to the final section. One captured Russian soldier, interviewed after surrendering, was asked what the battlefield was like. His answer was reported by CSIS analysts, and it stopped me cold when I read it. On the battlefield, I did not see a single Ukrainian soldier, only drones. I saw them only when I surrendered. Only drones, and there are lots and lots of them. Guys, don't come. It's a drone war. Russian soldier speaking to other Russian soldiers, telling them not to come. Because there are no humans left to fight. Only drones, only robots, only machines coming for you from every direction, and there is nowhere left to hide from them. That is what Ukraine has built on the ground, and it connects directly to the final, most frightening piece of this entire technological picture: the invisible. Engine running underneath all of it. the artificial intelligence being trained on millions of hours of real combat footage, the data advantage that no other country on Earth possesses. The reason why everything Ukraine is building is not just effective today, but is getting more lethal every single month. And that is exactly what Section 4 is about. I want to start this